Well, I criticize the mainstream media in Canada for turning a blind eye or even covering up actively Chinese Communist Party interference in our democracy. I note their total lack of curiosity, for example, in possible Chinese involvement in the online vote that selected Mark Carney to be prime minister. An astonishing thing I mentioned twice over the last few days was the almost uniform or unanimous phraseology by the regime media when it was revealed that the Chinese Communist Party was using the Chinese social media app WeChat to push Mark Carney, is that all the media said, no, China was targeting Mark Carney, implying that they were against him, when in fact the exact opposite was true. The fact that so many media outlets use that same word, targeting, was so astonishing to me. But I have to give credit where it's due. There are some journalists out there who do an excellent job, and even sometimes I would say a lonely job, revealing this foreign interference in our country. I often make fun of the Globe and Mail because they are the granddaddy of regime media. They're owned by Canada's richest oligarch, David Thompson. I mean, the fact that they even take government subsidies boggles my mind, but all that feels forgiven when I see stories like theirs today. Liberal candidate Peter Yuen chosen to replace Paul Chiang, linked to pro-Beijing groups and events. And it's a very in-depth report on the man who succeeded Paul Chiang. You'll remember Paul Chiang. He made these comments to the Chinese media about having someone literally kidnap a conservative pro-democracy Chinese Canadian and take them to the Chinese consulate for $1 million bounty. Remember this clip?
The other person that's running most probably is, the Chinese community knows, Zhou Te, Zhang Jing, right? He's looking for the nomination. The Chinese media knows him. He was in the media business in Hong Kong, and here in Canada, he's a radio host, or I don't know, for Singtel Media or Fairchild, he was a media person. So that's all he did all his life. But also right now, he is wanted by the Chinese government, and there's a $1 million reward on his head. So they want, if you guys want to pick him up and take him to the Chinese consulate, you make him $1 million. I'm just joking, but there is a arrest warrant out for him from the government of China, and there is a reward for him. But apart from that, I can't say more than that.
Well, after white knighting for Paul Chiang for almost a week, Chiang quit. Mark Carney said almost nothing, and handpicked the replacement, Peter Yuen, who is deeply involved in pro-China activity in Canada. He's a former policeman like Paul Chiang was, but here he is wearing a Canadian police uniform, singing a Communist Party song in Chinese in his full police regalia. Take a look at this. Who are all those cops? Like, that's not just one or two. That's at least half a dozen police wearing Toronto or other Canadian police uniforms while singing a patriotic song to the Communist Party of China. You know, if you remember a year or two ago, we sent David Menzies out to try and get the facts about these Chinese police stations in Canada. You know, there's a few of these police stations that are not affiliated with the Canadian government. They are the Chinese government's way of policing and spying on and regulating the diaspora community here. Why bother having a ghost police station that operates for China when you literally have people of a very senior rank? I would remind you that Peter Yuen was very high. I think he was the deputy chief of police in Toronto. And he's not doing this secretly. He's not hiding any of this. He's leaning into it. Unbelievable. Well, I mentioned the reporters at the Globe and Mail, in particular Steve Chase and Robert Fife, who have been excellent on this. But I think if I had to name the one Canadian journalist who has made a mark on this campaign and over the last few years in documenting and investigating the Chinese Communist Party's interference in our democracy, it would be our guest today. You probably can guess who I'm talking about. His name is Sam Cooper. He runs thebureau.news, and boy, are we ever grateful for his work and for him taking the time occasionally to pop by. Welcome back, Sam. It's great to see you again.
Good to be with you, Ezra.
You know, Sam, that video, we only showed about 10 seconds of it. That was an in Chinese language, Chinese political event. You know, I don't think police are allowed to be political in Canada. I know they're not. You wouldn't see police in uniform at a Liberal Party function, a Conservative Party function, because the police uniform must remain nonpartisan so everyone trusts it. It's astonishing to me to see half a dozen Toronto cops in a partisan political action for a political party. It just happens to be the Chinese Communist Party. I find that astonishing.
It's an astonishing scene, Ezra, and I broke that story, followed up well today by the Globe and Mail. I broke it on Sunday, and I broke it because I have a good contacts with Chinese language journalists in Canada who have such deep knowledge of Beijing's repressive interference networks. And so, Ezra, as you know, I reported on leaked intelligence documents, but my reporting was started by looking at broad daylight evidence, such as that video. And look, if you talk about the CCP police stations, Ezra, I noted that Mr. Yuen was standing beside a Markham community leader who the RCMP has investigated in Chinese police stations in Toronto and Vancouver. That's a fact. That meeting there, many of the politicians alleged to be involved in the Greater Toronto Beijing United Front election interference networks were at that very same event. Ezra, the Consul General of Toronto, spoke to everyone, including the police officers and the politicians at that event. I can go on, but suffice to say, anyone with intellectual curiosity can look at academic documents and videotaped events like this and say it raises deep concerns that this is Beijing's United Front interfacing with Canadian police and politicians. And Ezra, I do want to stress, good work by the Globe and Mail in digging into some of the open source findings that many Canadian researchers posted to my story after I broke it on Sunday. Anyone can find this stuff. They can also find pictures. I call them concerning pictures of Mr. Yuen and other Canadian police officers sitting down with known RCMP investigation suspects in the realm of organized crime. Deeply concerning.
Wow. Well, first of all, Sam, I didn't realize that you broke this story before the Globe. I do still give them a tip of the hat for following it. But I didn't mean to take away the gravity of your scoop, and I'm glad you corrected me on that. I am a subscriber to, in fact, literally right now, your latest email popped up on my phone, so I'm sorry I didn't give you proper credit for that. I will say that Bob Fife and Steve Chase are interested in this file, and I find that very heartening because they're very rare. So I won't give them the kudos for breaking the story, but I do think it's worth acknowledging that they followed your lead, because I wish more reporters would. Here's what's so interesting about this for me, Sam. Paul Chiang was a shocking case. He tried to pass it off as a joke, but when you say 3 times, hey, turn in my opponent for $1 million at the consulate, and when you're a former police officer, and when that kind of stuff actually happens, it is not a laughing matter. And Mark Carney couldn't bring himself to fire this guy for almost a week. So they had this crisis. They lost a candidate over it. So they went back to square one with this crisis in mind, and they chose this guy. I understand choosing a Chinese Canadian. That's the demographics of the riding. I get it. But to choose someone who's deeply, deeply connected with the Chinese Communist Party after they just had a scandal, that's what's so crazy to me. I mean, once might be carelessness, but twice? And I've got to ask questions about the Toronto Police Service itself now. I mean, that first guy, Paul Chiang, was a cop for 25 years. Did he treat people on the ground differently if they were a Chinese democracy activist versus a Chinese CCP activist? Because I would be afraid to be a Chinese Canadian who is either neutral or pro-democracy if a pro-CCP cop pulls me over. And you're saying he's hanging out with people who were working on these ghost police stations. I mean, I don't have evidence that this guy was a spy, but it doesn't seem like he's hiding his affiliations at all. I think this is nuts, Sam. How could they have, the fact that they chose basically an identical guy to the guy they sacked is astonishing.
Ezra, I've got 2 points. First of all, your observation, as usual, is very prescient. Look, for this individual to be constantly meeting with consul officials and community leaders that I'm asserting to you, provably in court, community leaders that the RCMP is investigating in Chinese police station networks, it points to a concern I'm already aware of in other cities such as Vancouver, that very elite Chinese former police or military officials with direct connections, unfortunately, to Chinese organized crime, make donations to police foundations in Canada. And it appears to me that they attempt to advertise their linkages to Canadian police services in sending, I believe, a message to the Chinese community that they have some influence within Chinese police. So that is one thing. I'm saying you're right. But let's wind it back. In my story, Broken Sunday, on Mr. Yuen, there's an even more, I would say, mind-blowing connection. Mr. Yuen joined the board of a Markham-based Chinese international school called NOIC. He joined it within the past few years. And Ezra, this is the very same school that came up in Hogue Commission testimony, in which Chinese visa-holding students were allegedly bussed into a riding to support a certain candidate under threat, allegedly from the consul general.
Oh my!
So let's look at that in the picture of this individual standing at a gala beside a community leader, where they were, received the oratory of the consul general, the very same consul general unit that's alleged to be involved in threats to students. Wow. Look at that triangulation, Ezra. Wow. I could go on and on. It's mind-blowing.
It's very interesting, because if that were in another political setting, I think it would be stopped. I think there would be discipline. But the fact that the political party happens to be foreign, that's just incredible.